Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you podcast number 95 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Well, not too long ago, Linkara did his History of Power Rangers review on Operation Overdrive. And from that video, he went ahead and stated why he thought that Operation Overdrive was the worst season of Power Rangers ever. Now, I did not agree with Linkara's opinion, so I made a video response, basically not so much critiquing his review, but pointing why I liked Operation Overdrive, defending some of the things that it did. But I also made aware that I understood Linkara's criticisms, and he's free to go ahead and have them because that's his opinion and that's his show. So he can say what he wants on his show, and I say what I want on my show, which I do from time to time. Now, the video I made actually did get a lot of response out there, a lot of positive views and so forth. But there was also an element of negative criticism in the comments section. And oddly enough, it actually has nothing to do with Operation Overdrive. And I will go ahead and explain. I made note, and it was really a brief note in that particular video, that I do not believe Operation Overdrive is the worst season of Power Rangers ever. I believe Power Rangers RPM is the worst season of Power Rangers ever. Now, longtime viewers will know that that is nothing new to Tavern. Since day one of starting this show, I have made the point that that RPM is the worst season of all time. And actually, one of my earliest videos was a kind of a back and forth with Raptor, since Raptor, he loves RPM. He stated why he liked it, and I stated why I hated it. But that video has since been deleted, so unfortunately it's no longer available, and I no longer have the original audio. But there were a lot of people on there criticizing me, defend why you think RPM is the worst of all time and so forth. So I think it's time to go ahead and revisit that. Since that video is no longer there, I think I want to go into detail, just as I did there, on why I think RPM is the worst season of all time. Because, we've had 20 plus years of Power Rangers. I've liked just about every season. I can't say I ever dislike a season, but this one really takes the cake. I do think this is the worst season of Power Rangers ever, and tonight I will go ahead and defend why I think that. Now, before we actually get into this, I want to make one thing really clear, and something really bugged me from the comments. And this is not necessarily something that was directed towards me, but I think just in general when it comes to comments and when people have opinions. One of the comments that I got, and I don't remember it verbatim, and I'm not even going to look it up at the moment, was basically the commenter had stated that they had tuned out everything that I said as soon as I said I hated RPM and I thought it was the worst season. Basically pointing out that anything I had said after RPM was the worst season was rendered invalid and, in my opinion, did not count. Now, whether you want to listen to my opinion or not is your choice. You do not have to go ahead and listen to these podcasts or watch any of my videos. It's your choice to go ahead and do so, and I thank you if you do go ahead and watch it. But I think in a case where you say that somebody's opinion on another subject is invalid because they think a certain way about one thing, I don't think that's the right thing to go ahead and do. I do not believe that my opinions on RPM make my opinions on Die Ranger or my opinions on Zeo any less valid than anyone else's out there. And you know what? Again, Linkara thought was the worst season of all time in Operation Overdrive. I disagreed with him, but I don't think his opinions are invalid. Again, he's the only other insightful person that I know that actually looks into this stuff that deeply, which is why I have tremendous respect for him. But again, if he makes an opinion that I do not agree with, I'm not going to go out and say, hey, I hate your opinion on this, therefore anything else you ever said on the top of the fourth wall is invalid because you don't know quality, you don't know taste. I'm not going to go ahead and say that because that's not right to go ahead and do. Just if you told me out there that In Space was the worst season of all time, I'm going to say, hey, that's your opinion and you're free to have it, but I'm not going to condemn you for it or say that any other opinions you have are invalid because of that. So with that little rant out of the way, and I apologize for that, but I think that's something important that needs to be said here, given the way that the YouTube communities are and just the way people are with other opinions. So if you do not agree with the opinions I'm going to share with you tonight regarding RPM, well, then don't listen to the video. Just stop it here and go from there. I'm going to tell you why I don't like RPM. I'm going to articulate it as best as I can, but beyond that, if you think that my opinions are wrong, well, okay, but don't say that everything else I've ever said or I'm going to say is wrong just because I think it's the worst season. There's my little soapbox up there, so let's actually talk about RPM now. And I will concede to this. There are some positives about RPM. There is potential in the series. There were a few gems in there. So I want to go ahead and talk about the positives first, and then we will rip into the series with all the negative hate that I have for it. Now, first of all, I think one of the best positives the season actually has going for it is the premise. When I first saw the previews for this, and I've said this before, it looks like a sci-fi original show as opposed to something Power Rangers, or at least that was the idea that I had when we first got those little leaked trailers, basically. Because we had seen the Power Rangers fight the Machine Empire in Zia. We've seen them fight machines and robots and all that. That's happened. But we've never had a all-out war with the machines a la Terminator. And let's actually use that reference because that is essentially what I thought we were getting in RPM, is that we would get Power Rangers meets the Terminator. Corinth is the last human civilization. These are the last people there on Earth, and we are fighting a desperate war against the machines. And the last line of defense to defeat them are the Power Rangers. Because think of what that premise entails, not only in RPM itself, but the Power Rangers universe. And let me kind of get into that, because first of all, again, you have a dome city that's protected, and you have to hold off the machines who, based on the series, they've taken over the rest of the world. That's basically what has happened in RPM. And then these thousands, maybe millions, I'm not exactly sure how big Corinth is, are the last surviving humans. And that's a good enough struggle within itself. That's a good enough story to go ahead and tell by itself. But we're also in the Power Rangers universe. So that means, in order for Venjix to have taken over, that not only means that he has killed or destroyed every Power Ranger that has come before him, or before RPM, but the Earth is in such a state that they can't get outside help to intervene. I mean, think about it for a second. Venjix has taken over the world in RPM. And within that world, he's destroyed everybody but this lone settlement of humans. But the Alien Rangers of Aquitar have not been able to liberate Earth. The forces of Triforia have not been able to liberate Earth. The Space Rangers, who are probably off of Earth, have not been able to liberate Earth. The Marinoid colony with the Galaxy Rangers, they have not been able to intervene. The Horath, who were friends of Bulk and Skull and consider them heroes, they have not intervened and been able to go ahead and help. That means that Venjix is so powerful that not only did he defeat every Power Ranger team before RPM, but the Earth is so well protected that any influence from outside, from outer space, all of our allies that are out there cannot help us. That the last stand must be fought with the humans on Earth. We can't have any other help. That's what we need to go ahead and do. And that premise in itself, that's amazing, because that tells you, first of all, how powerful Venjix is, how relentless his armies are, what his resources must be, not only to have taken over the entire planet, but to defeat all the Power Rangers and fortify Earth to such a degree that nobody else can help us. I think that's a great way to go ahead and go. Unfortunately, that's not what we got, and I'm going to get into the implications of that as we get into this video, but I will point this positive out in relation to the premise. One of the main issues I had going in with RPM once I started having my negative opinions about it is that it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the Power Rangers continuity. Now, luckily, it's been said that it's an alternate dimension. This is brought up in Samurai and is brought up in Super Megaforce. So, one of the positives I have is it's not part of the main Power Ranger continuity. That eliminates a number of problems that I have with it. It eliminates a number of issues that I have with the series, but it does take away from what I've just been talking about how powerful Venjix is. But I do like to think of RPM as an outlier, not part of the main continuity. It makes me sleep better at night, I guess. But that's just a minor little thing. Now, what else did I like about the series? I liked Alphabet Soup. I liked the concept of that, because the thing about RPM that's kind of interesting is that in Power Rangers, we've always had this outside threat. It's always been us versus them. We've never really had humans become the main villains. Now, I know what you're going to say about Anton Mercer and Strom and all that kind of stuff. But my point is, it's like humans never really turn on each other within Power Rangers. It's always the humans of Earth versus an outside source. Now, if humans like Anton Mercer are corrupted or Lothor seeking power, that's one thing. But with Alphabet Soup, let's be honest, those people are diabolical. Taking children like, Jim, Gemma, and Dr. K, and, taking them from their families, locking them away, and making them figure out missile codes and weapons and develop all this technology, developing something like the Venjix virus and all that. That's some pretty scary stuff. I know nowadays we live in a culture where it's like conspiracy theories and the government's out to get us and somebody did this and all that and there's the puppet master and whatever. But in RPM, that is a reality. And frankly, that is much scarier than anything I think that the Venjix threat really kind of gives us. And actually, let's go back to the Venjix threat, because I did forget to go ahead and mention this. Something else about Venjix that makes that idea, and that's in quotes here, that idea work. No Power Ranger villain, with the exception of Mesogog, and I'll talk about that in a second, has really had extermination and genocide of the human race on their mind. Look at every villain that we've had in Power Rangers up until RPM. What do they want to do? They want to conquer Earth. They want to dominate Earth. They want to gain the Quasar Sabers. They want to get revenge on the Rangers. They want to do all these things. But nobody wants to eliminate the human race. True, Mesogog wants to turn us into dinosaurs, but I think there's a common theme through all the different Power Ranger villains. They want to dominate us and change our way of life. Venjix is the first villain to ever come in and not want to change our way of life and what government we're under, how we live our day-to-day lives, or in slavery and things like that. He just wants us dead. And I think that makes him one of the most evil villains in Power Rangers because of his motivation. Yeah, Mesogog wants to turn us into dinosaurs, but frankly, I'd rather be a dinosaur than be dead. So, in terms of the premise with Venjix and what he wants to accomplish, genocide's a damn big deal out there. So, again, tying back into the premise, that's pretty powerful. That's some serious shit right there. And I apologize, I usually don't like cursing on my channel, but yes, that's, again, back to the premise. I think I've said enough about that. I've said enough about Alphabet Soup. That's some scary stuff too, okay? So I think those two elements that were in RPM were good. Alphabet Soup, I think, worked in what it was. The premise did not follow through very well, and again, I will go ahead and talk about that. I do actually have a couple more positives if you guys don't mind. There were a number of characters I did like. Flynn is my absolute favorite RPM character. I think he's awesome. I've once described him, and I still believe it. He's a poor man's Miles O'Brien from Star Trek. He's Scottish, he's fun, he's the engineer, he stands for a cause, and the best thing about him that I like is that when he dedicates himself to something, he will do it to the end, and beyond that. I mean, if you watch Ranger Blue, that's where he gets in trouble the most, is he does his job, but he goes beyond it, which is not negative. It's what he's supposed to be doing, or at least that's the way I perceive it to be. And that's what gets him into trouble, is continuing to do the right thing beyond what reason would dictate, I guess. So I've talked about Flynn, my top, my Dream Ranger team, so I would suggest you guys go ahead and check out that video. But Flynn, he's awesome. I do think he is the best character within that show. Now, we have other characters in the show I do like. I like Dylan to a degree. I like his backstory, the fact that he has amnesia and that he's a cyborg and all that. But I'm going to also be honest, it's kind of derivative. Because, of course, what character was very popular at this time? They just had a movie that come out not too early from that. Wolverine. Basically, Dylan was RPM or Power Rangers' answer to the Wolverine archetype, to the Wolverine character. Everything from the jacket to the enhancements by a project that he can't remember, and looking for someone and all that. So Dylan's story is very derivative, but for the way it was handled within Power Rangers, I think it worked okay. Enough to at least, merit a positive. I don't think they necessarily did anything too bad that ruined the character. He might have been brooding a little bit too much, but beyond that, I don't have anything really negative to say about it, so it worked out pretty well. And I think the last positive I will go ahead and say here are the characters of Jim and Gemma. First of all, Gemma is very beautiful. The weird thing is like actually in the show, I don't know what the makeup people did. Like, she's not as attractive in the show, but you look at her actress outside the show, when she's like doing posing or even just like on Twitter pics and all that kind of stuff, she's very, very lovely. But beyond the aesthetic, I like their characters, that they're super geniuses. I like the little quirk of them finish each other's sentences. They don't have a high moral standing. They just want to blow stuff up for the fun of it. It's actually kind of refreshing to see that in some Power Ranger characters. So I think the way Jim and Gemma, were created worked out pretty well. Was there some problematic execution of their character? Yeah, I'd go ahead and say that. But again, not enough to go ahead and merit them anything negative on this list. But I will say this, something that they were hinting at that they never did was a relationship between Flynn and Gemma. Because you got Dylan and Summer, you got them together at the end of the series. You kind of got Ziggy and Dr. K together, which I never really liked that anyway, but whatever. But you didn't get Flynn and Gemma together. I mean, why not? They made a great couple. They were the tech geeks, and they understood each other. And there's just something to be said about this highly intelligent woman and this blue-collar worker guy who's got some knowledge kind of coming together. It's kind of like a social thing, where the poor guy meets a rich girl, or vice versa and all that, and there's just something very genuine about relationships that are built out of mutual respect, and you don't look at social standing or money or prestige or anything. There's definitely something to be said about that. So, well, that's all the good stuff I have to go ahead and say about RPM. So, again, if you don't want to hear this, go ahead and stop, because I am definitely going to go ahead and rip into it, and I'm going to mention every little thing. Whether you think it's a nitpick or not, I'm just going to point out things from little choices they've made to full episodes that I think are big problems. So, without further ado, why I hate RPM. First of all, let's talk about the title. RPM. What does it mean? Okay, racing performance machines. That's what I've seen on wikis. That's what I've seen floating around. I've never heard them refer to it that way. And even if they did, what does that have to do with anything? Racing performance machines. All that tells me is that their vehicles, or some vehicle, is in racing performance, or in a performance of racing. Again, it makes no sense. I know RPM typically stands for rotations per minute, but that also makes no sense. If you're going to go ahead and do that, at least give a reason for it. When Dika Ranger did it, Special Police Dika Ranger. Okay, that makes sense. When SPD did it, Space Patrol Delta. Less sense because they're not really in space, but nevertheless we have an answer for it. Even the obscure Power Ranger titles like Operation Overdrive, well, the operation's called Overdrive, therefore there's the title. Power Rangers Zeo, the Zeo Crystal. Why RPM? Name me one thing in the series that's an RPM. Name me one thing in the series that has to do with racing. I mean, I don't get it. The name is stupid. Moving on. The theme song. I hate the theme song. I think that's the worst song. I think there's only like 6 lyrics in the whole song. And it doesn't have the choir to it. It doesn't have this like, I can't wait to get into the show thing. Because, I can play the space theme. I can play the turbo theme, and I can enjoy it because it's a lot of fun. Shift into turbo. That's awesome. We get with RPM, we stand together. And I'm sorry, it's just, I don't like it. I can't rock to it. It's not fun. And, to Linkara, yes, Linkara, the theme song, Operation Overdrive is pretty bad, but RPM is much worse. Wait till you get to it. You'll see my point. So again, maybe little nitpicks out there, but those are just like 2 basic things of a show. First of all, you have to have a good theme song, and 2, you have to know what your damn title is and what it means. What's the significance of RPM? I don't get it. I also hate the character of Summer. There is something about rich characters in media that I do not like. Now, we have characters like Batman and Green Arrow and Tony Stark. These are characters who have wealth and they have money, and they do the right thing eventually because something propels them into it. With Batman, it was the murder of his parents. With Tony Stark, it was him being captured and his heart being replaced and realizing what his arms were doing to people around the world. So you have that motivating factor. Now, that is there for Summer, no doubt. When they did Ranger Yellow, which I can't believe was a 2-parter, moving on, they showed that she was this vapid, empty, stuck-up, dumb little girl. And what made her change was the end of the world and her butler dying. Now, was her butler her friend? She didn't really treat him that way. So for him to die, for her... Because here's what happens. The end of the world happens. She's in shock. Her friends turn on her. And her butler dies. Are these enough to precipitate a change? Yes, they are. But the way that Summer acts, and even the character she becomes, they just don't mesh with each other. What I look at her as is, I look at her as this vapid, mean girl. And I guess that's the best analogy I can go ahead and use. That she's this vapid, mean girl, and that what gets her to change is the world around her, the betrayal of her friends, and her butler dying. But what she becomes, I just don't see the follow-through on that. I mean, you can point to Batman when he was a child and he grew up into somebody else. And you can point Tony Stark, but Tony Stark was essentially the same kind of person from start to finish, and with some varying degrees, but he dedicated himself to a particular goal. Summer did not necessarily dedicate herself to doing anything. Yes, she became a ranger, but that's because she was chosen to become a ranger. Why she was chosen, I'm still not quite sure. Because she helped Scott, I don't think that's enough. Yes, we have shown that she is talented with certain skills like fencing and fighting and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But there's nothing to indicate that this character, whose world has been turned upside down, is going to be a person who's worthy enough to be a Power Ranger. And I think that's where it comes into it, is the worthiness to be a Power Ranger. Now, a lot of you can say that she's a lot like Kimberly and, her vapid, valley girl, like, oh my God, type of personality. And that's a fair comparison. But here's the main difference. First of all, things are much different than they were in 93 and the character archetypes and stereotypes than what we have today. You can get away with Kimberly in 1993, 1994, but also keep in mind that Kimberly did change over time and overcame those superficial qualities. Summer, on the other hand, I'm not seeing where she's really overcoming anything here, and it's a character that the series has evolved out of. You cannot write a character like Kimberly for Power Rangers today because the world is different, people are different, the series is different. So to have that type of character in there just doesn't work. And yes, again, Summer went through a change. But even the way we're introduced to her, she has this, because she's rich, she has this holier than thou, mightier than thou, I know what's best, and I have this false confidence about myself. Which is not to say that all rich people are like that, but I've met a number of people that are like that in real life. And when I look at Summer, I see those people in her, where it's this false modesty that she is projecting to the world. And that's what is really irksome about Summer, is that she is projecting a false modesty, that she still looks at herself in a certain way, but she's trying to keep up appearances. And I don't think she deserves to be the Yellow Ranger. Now, if you're telling me that she is the best person to be the Yellow Ranger, or, excuse me, Series Operator Yellow, or whatever the hell title is, why can't you just call her the Yellow Ranger? You know, whatever. If you're telling me she's the best candidate out there, then your selection pool is pretty bad. And I will get to selection pools here in a minute. But I just don't think she's worthy to be a Power Ranger. I know I probably haven't articulated as best, but there's just something irksome about these rich, snobby characters. And even when her parents come in with the wedding, I can't stand those people either. Well, the world is ending, but you need to get married because blah, 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 blah. I don't even know the reason she got married because it doesn't matter. We know she's not going to get married and all that. I mean, come on. That was stupid. I mean, it's the end of the world. You must get married to this other guy because of a business deal or arrangement or his family's wealthy and all that kind of stuff. No. So that's all I'm going to go ahead and say for now about Summer. I just don't like her. She's irksome. She's one of the Rangers I really maybe despise. Despise is the right word. She is one of those characters that I do despise very much. Let's talk about the villains of RPM. So again, I praise the premise and what that essentially means about Venjix and how powerful he is. But I think when we look at the concept of it's an alternate universe, it's a different reality, that likely, and we'll have to debate this at another time, it's debatable what actually came before RPM, if the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Zeo, Turbo, In Space, if any of those Rangers even existed within this new timeline, within this continuity. Let us assume for the sake of this argument that those other Rangers did not exist, okay? If that is the case, then Venjix is really not that powerful, because I mean, if a virus took over the world, it's not going to be that difficult. You don't have that much opposition. If the Power Rangers were involved, then I think it's a more significant victory. Just as if anybody took over the world with anything with certain heroes standing in their way, it becomes a greater victory. When you see that Brainiac has taken over Earth, you know that in order for him to have done that, he would have had to defeat Superman. And if Superman's defeated, well, that's a significant victory that shows you how powerful he is. So if Venjix destroys every Power Ranger that ever existed before RPM, then in that case, yeah, he's pretty damn powerful. But if there are no other Power Rangers, and we're kind of led to believe in some instances that these are the only Power Rangers, yes, I know there's the Easter egg with the Operation Overdrive helmet, but it seems that he's just not that powerful. And yes, he is programmed by Dr. K, who is in essence a child, so he may not be as sophisticated. But Venjix really makes a lot of dumb decisions and dumb moves. And those that he chooses to surround himself with... They say that if you ever question the quality of a man's character, look to his friends and those who he surrounds himself with. And I believe that to be true on a number of occasions. I mean, if you surround yourself with gang members, you're probably not that good of a person. So is true with Venjix that he surrounds himself with such incompetence. First of all, General Crusher and Shifter. Why didn't you just call them Bebop and Rocksteady? Because that's essentially what they are. You have taken the dignity of the Go-Onger villains, and don't worry, we'll get into the adaptation portion of it because I think that's also worth noting, and basically made them into joke characters. Now, this is a villain who's taken over the world, and he needs help to further his plans because he's essentially HAL 2000, which I will also credit on Venjix. Pretty good imagery there with the red eye. I get it. Makes sense. Good for you. But you have to make villains that are so dumb and stupid. I mean, I get the fact that you don't want them to make them so smart that they could eventually overthrow you, but they're programmed machines. You can program them to be loyal, and I think you have enough power that you can destroy them if they try to take over. But the fact that you made them so dumb and incompetent, that's asinine. And then let's get to Kilobyte, who I always liked Kilobyte. I thought he was a good villain. He had a good voice to him. But then they had to go and make him sexist. Let me repeat that. Kilobyte, the robot, is sexist towards women. Human women. Let that simmer in your head for a second. Why would he be sexist towards women? He says to Tenaya 7, well, you're just a girl. And she's a machine. She's a cyborg. Although I think she believes she's a true machine. But the point is, he looks at her as inferior because she is female. Why would a machine do that? I don't have an answer for you. I really don't know. I've thought this over and over. Why would Kilobyte think that Tenaya, being a female, would not be a threat? This is something that continues in the Dome Dolls, which I will also get to that. That irritates me just as much. But I don't get it. It's a machine. I mean, if Kilobyte wants to identify himself as male, that's fine. If he would say, he and all that kind of stuff, I get it, okay? But to think that another gender is inferior like that, which is a human fallacy, being programmed into a machine, which I will remind you, Kilobyte was created by Venjix, and Venjix was created by who? Dr. K. And what is Dr. K? A woman! So you're telling me that a woman who developed a virus, which has no gender whatsoever, developed a robot, which for some reason identifies as male, to be sexist against human women. I really hope you guys can see where I'm coming from here. I don't get that. It makes no sense whatsoever. And you take the dignity away from the villains in that case. Okay, you make two stupid villains, I get it. But to make somebody sexist like that? I mean, come on. And just for the record here, Kilobyte is nowhere near as awesome as Kilo Khan. If Kilo Khan was the main villain in this series, I don't think the RPM Rangers would have survived. Because I do believe Kilo Khan is a superior computer virus compared to Venjix. There, I said it on the table. What you gonna do about it? Moving on. Tenaya 7. First of all, she's just irksome. She just really annoys me. And talk about chewing the scenery. Ugh. I got annoyed with her so quick. I hate her costume. I hate that visor she wears. And point out, she wears that visor. I think the reason she wears the visor is because, and spoiler if you haven't seen this, but I think everybody's probably seen RPM, is that she is Dylan's long-lost sister who was blind. And if she wears the mask, not only does it mirror that she was blind, visually and all that, but if Dylan was to ever regain his memories, he would recognize her as his sister. Okay, fair enough, but damn, that visor looked ugly. I just couldn't stand looking at her. She looked ridiculous to me. I mean, a lot of people think that there are some ridiculous-looking villains out there. She is the most ridiculous-looking. But I think the main criticism I have with Tanaya, other than being annoying, when I said that Dylan's story was derivative, my goodness, is her story derivative. It's been there, done that. And not even in the sense of literature, but in the sense of Power Rangers. Name me another season where you have a heroic male Power Ranger who is looking for his long-lost sister. Turns out that his long-lost sister is actually a brainwashed villain, brings her over to his side, and then she is brainwashed again, and his journey throughout the rest of the season and into the final episode is to bring her back to the fold of good. Yes, Power Rangers in Space, Andros, and Corone. So we already had this story in Power Rangers. Why did we have to go ahead and have it again? Couldn't there be something else that we could have done right here? Why did we have to go back to Power Rangers in Space and essentially mine that story for good ideas and yet not execute them? I mean, if this was the first time we had something like that, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's good. I like that. But again, we already had in Power Rangers, and it was done better. And, the sincerity that Melanie Perkins brings to the role of Corone, and when she's curious about wanting to know about her parents and her life, and her willingness to sacrifice herself to help the Rangers, which turns her into the cyborg, that's very genuine. That's very emotional. I didn't get that sense from Tanaya. And sure, she did similar things, but the actress just couldn't pull it off. And maybe she wasn't meant to go ahead and pull it off, or she's just a bad actress. I don't know. The point of the matter is, we've had this story before. We've done this. There was nothing new that we got in this story. So what was the point? Why go ahead and rehash something that we've already had but not do it better? Maybe their goal was to go ahead and make it better, but again, it just didn't come off in execution. And actually, let's talk about execution, because something I've tried to explain to a number of people in the past about RPM that just doesn't really seem to resonate with them. Let's talk about the difference between a story and the plot. And I know it's kind of hard to tell the difference here. And as a film student, I have to be aware of certain things regarding plot and story. But let me put it into this context. A plot is a man dies, then his wife dies. That is the plot. A story is a man dies, and his wife dies of grief. Do you see the difference there? Because when you're telling a plot, you're just telling what happens. When you're telling the story, you're saying why it happens. So when I talk about the positive premise of RPM, I'm talking about how the plot is good. The plot of a virus taking over the world, last line of defense is the Power Rangers. Good plot. Unfortunately for RPM, the story does not mesh. And why is that? Well, as I said, my original view of Power Rangers RPM when we were getting the announcements and all that is that it was going to be this dire, gritty situation into the world. Power Rangers meets Terminator Salvation. That was what I was anticipating for the show. Now, maybe I had set my hopes too high. Yeah, who's to say? But I expected better, because the truth is, I think as any show goes on from season 1 to season 15 to season 18, whatever and stuff, you pretty much expect them to get better. I mean, that's what I believe. I do believe that the thing should go ahead and get better from that point, and that you learn from the mistakes of the past. What RPM did not do is learn from the mistakes of the past, particularly from Turbo. And why do I say that? Well, RPM is meant to be a serious story. I don't think anybody can really deny that. That when you talk about the end of the world and genocide, you have to have a serious story. I think SF Debris put it well. If you try to pitch a movie that's a musical, but the studio wants a film about Auschwitz, you can't turn that into a musical. And that's a very fair point. I think it's a very true point. In the same case, you can't take footage from Go-Onger, which is, I wouldn't even say satire, but it is a comedy more than anything, and mesh it with this end-of-the-world serious tone. And I think what happened was, somewhere along the line, they wanted to tell this story, or this plot that's about the end of the world, but have a story that contained comedy. And those things do not mix. What happened in Go-Onger does not mix with what happened in RPM. Now, there are many times out there where you have adaptations that do work. Look at Lost Galaxy and Gigaman, a nature-based story that eventually became a space colony story. That worked because of good editing and good writing. But when you get the mixture of Go-Onger and RPM, it just doesn't work. And I'll give you some examples of that from Go-Onger and specifically RPM itself. I mean, let's look at the integration of the Zord footage first off. So any of you who's actually seen Go-Onger knows that the Zords are sentient, that they have the soul chips, which contains their bodily essence. They put them into the casts, which are the Zords, just miniature form, and the soul energizes them and they grow large and become giant, and that's how you become the Zords. And the Zords themselves, they talk, they have eyes, and they have sentience. RPM eliminates that altogether to where you have a giant bus with a lion's face for no reason. Now, I know what you're going to say. Dr. K explains, I think, in the episode Ranger Blue, like their sensors, blah, blah, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. That's you justifying your stupidity in my mind. You took something that does not work with your premise and tried to justify it. Now, is it clever to take a 7-year-old girl who developed this Zords and technology, or 8-year-old girl that developed Zords and technology and from a child's perspective? Yeah, that works. But when you compare that to the end of the world, I mean, and again, I'm going to go back to the Terminator reference because I think this is the most apt. Do you think John Connor would get into a helicopter that is shaped like a giant chicken? I mean, seriously, do you think he would? It's like, I'm going to approve this design for this helicopter. Make sure it looks like a giant chicken. I'm sorry, if you saw a giant chicken helicopter smashing T-100s, it doesn't look right. It does not mesh. It's completely out of where it should be. And again, we're not talking about a bunch of ragtag teenagers who are doing their own thing. We're talking about the last legitimate government on Earth utilizing giant cartoon anime Zords to save the world. There's nothing in and of itself wrong with that, but when you're trying to have this mesh up, this serious tone with this comedy and this jokey nature that's not being taken seriously, then you have a problem. And let me utilize this a little bit more. The explanation for the explosions on when they morph and the giant explosions happen behind them, okay, that's cute, but that's just the aesthetic of the show. It doesn't really have any logical basis, and that's particularly fine. But then when you have Flynn weaponize it by turning the morphing chip upside down, that's just stupid, because that is comedy you're trying to inject into the series while being serious at the same time. It's like basically saying if you insert your SIM card upside down your phone, then the screen will be reversed on your phone. That's not how that works. By all rights, when Flynn tries to morph with his chip upside down like that, it should not work. The morpher should explode or feedback or just not work at all. I mean, you're taking something illogical and trying to put it into a serious situation. I'll give you 2 more examples that we have here. The cannon in the refrigerator. You know, a lot of people talk about women refrigerators and they talk about nuking the fridge and all that kind of stuff. But I draw the line at cannon in the refrigerator. Yes, I believe a man can survive a nuclear explosion in a lead-lined refrigerator. Every bone in his body would be broken, but you know what? I will believe it. But I will not believe that in the middle of Corinth, in a garage, which, by the way, has an open door to the garage, that an unauthorized user who is not allowed to drink the milk or touch the last piece of cake would run into a cannon in the refrigerator. Why don't you take that cannon and place it on the outside? And actually, in fact, why don't you have a security gate in front of it? Because, and this will get to another point, there are criminals in Corinth. They have jails, they have cartels, they have illegitimate organizations going around. And yet the Rangers have an open door policy to their base. But if you get in their fridge and you take away their Mountain Dew, you're going to get blasted in the head, buddy. I swear it's like something out of an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon. I just don't get it. Why is it in there? You have comedy and not thinking seriously about it. And several times Tanaya has taken her hand off, and we see it has a life of its own. And there's a scene in, I forget the episode, where she takes off her hand to infiltrate the Ranger base, and comedy ensues. We have somebody who has violated the sanctity of Corinth, got into the Ranger base, and can have devastating intel against them in which they can win, and it's played for laughs. I mean, why? Why is all this random comedy injected into the series? I know you don't want to be too dark with the series, but there's a way to do that. And you know what? I never thought I had to go ahead and say this, but I'm going to use an example using Jar Jar Binks. Now, for the record, I have nothing really against Jar Jar, but I can understand some of the criticism. When George Lucas did the original Star Wars A New Hope in 1977, he had R2-D2 and C-3PO as the comedic duo, basically. They were, the straight man and the funny man. And it was their interaction with each other, the things that C-3PO would go ahead and say, and it adds some levity to an otherwise pretty heavy adventure film. Now, Lucas tried to do the same thing in 1999 with The Phantom Menace, and failed because he injected too much comedy into what was a somber and serious film with things that are very important happening. You're doing the same thing in Power Rangers, doing the same thing in RPM. And actually, let's talk about the comedy in one particular episode, because it was when I saw this episode that I really had to think about leaving this show. Maybe even the franchise, but not really. It's just when I saw this episode, I'm like, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. Let me put it in this perspective. Imagine you are the leader of a resistance force. There may be less than 1 million people left on the planet Earth, and you're confined in this domed-like environment. Machines surrounded on all sides. The rest of the world, a desolate, poisonous wasteland. If you step outside for a minute, you could die. Okay? You have 3 other allies on your team, but you need to get a 5th one to complete your team. It's a desperate situation. The stakes are the way of the world. If you do not succeed, the world is over. There's nothing else after that. There is no second chance. There is no restart. There is no Konami code. There's nothing. So you need to pick the 5th member of your team with care and consideration. So how do you do this? Do you go to the military personnel and choose the best of the best that's available to you? Do you get one of the colonels to do it? Do you get one of the Black Ops members that's probably in there? Do you get somebody who's knowledgeable with technical expertise? Do you post to the civilian population saying, we need somebody to help us? Join in with the defense force. If you're good enough, we'll go ahead and put you on the team. I mean, is that what you would do? Or would you throw a talent show? I can't express how utterly ridiculous this is. In the episode Go for the Green, they are looking for somebody to become the Green Ranger. Mind you, it has been established that once the morpher is bonded to your DNA, it cannot be used again. And there is evidence to suggest that you cannot replicate this Ranger technology and create any more because your resources are finite. There are no replicators. This is what you have. So why in the world did anybody think it was a good idea to have a talent show? The episode Go for the Green shows the Rangers trying to find the Green Ranger. And Ziggy has organized a talent show. Now, if I was Scott, if I was the Red Ranger, if I was an actual leader, I would say, Ziggy, thank you for your input, but this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Goodbye. That's what I would have said. I probably would have used what Spock would refer to as colorful metaphors, but that would be the gist of what I'm saying. Go home. You're done. Whatever. How did this happen? Ziggy says, let's throw a talent show. And a la American Idol, you have Scott, Dylan, and Summer sitting down, judging these people, going next, and bringing different people in to become the Green Ranger. And at one point, they have a ventriloquist and a magician, and I think some guy doing hula hoops and all that. Really? These are the guys you're going to have to defend the Earth, to defend last bit of civilization. Excuse me. I don't get it. Did Colonel Truman think this was a good idea, or was he even consulted? I would love to have seen that conversation. Father, I know that we have a bad relationship and all that, but we need to get through this if the human race is going to survive. Therefore, I have thrown a talent show. We've gone through all the contestants, and we believe this magician is our best candidate. So with your permission, I'd like to give him the Green Ranger morpher so he can permanently become a Power Ranger. Now, he doesn't have true magic. It's all sleight of hand, but we believe he's really good, really entertaining with children, so he will be the best choice. Do you agree, Father? I knew you would see things my way, so yes, let's go do it. Again, I hope you guys can see how stupid that is. And what actually adds insult to injury in this episode, it's not as bad, but it's like rubbing salt in a gushing wound. A gushing, festering wound. Because it's the dumbest thing in all of Power Rangers. Actually, there's probably dumber things, but we'll get to those. Tanaya infiltrates Corinth, disguises herself as human, and almost nearly convinces the Rangers to give her the morpher. Which, I don't need to tell you, would mean the end of the Power Rangers pretty much if she had this power. Green Ranger power may not be that powerful, but nevertheless, that's pretty devastating if the Rangers got it. Keep in mind that Corinth security is supposed to scan people to see if they have any robotic parts in them. Now, she was able to overcome this security glitch, or oversight, or whatever you want to call it. But also keep in mind, this is a domed city. And I am pretty sure there is a census somewhere of every single damn person in that city. And what you're telling me is that Tanaya not only got into the city, got past the scanners, but they didn't even check her identity to see if she was an actual citizen, if she actually checked up in the records? That boggles the mind. Basically what you're saying is that Corinth security is like a screen door on a submarine. How did she get past? I mean, did the Rangers not look at an application, find out her name, cross-check that with a database? What if she was a criminal? Which, again, we've established there are criminals in Corinth. There is a jail. There are cartels. What if she was part of one of those cartels? Did you check? Did you run a background? Did she even present you with identification? A social security number, a driver's license, something, a Corinth ID. At least when you're on TerraVenture, I know there are stowaways, but in Corinth, the situation is so different than TerraVenture. I mean, if Leo was going to go ahead and join the GSA, they would have to get his identification, find out who he is, and they would eventually find out he's a stowaway. And yes, there are times that Leo gets around that, but that's part of the story, and it's believable. It is not believable, though, that Tenaya could do this. So basically, in one episode, we have a double whammy of pure incompetence by the Rangers and everybody in charge, and pure incompetence by everybody in charge again, and letting Tenaya in, and not checking her identification. I mean, imagine if you nowadays got on a commercial airliner and you didn't have to show your identification and you just walked past security. That wouldn't bode well for you. And again, if I have to be pat down 3 times on my way to Kyoto, I think they should be a little bit more stringent in their security in Corinth. So that's enough about go for the green. Let's go back to a couple of other things here that I believe are big issues. Let's talk about Fresno Bob and the cartels now. I would believe that in the end of the world, you still have people that do things like steal food. You have people that would side with the enemy. You would have all that kind of stuff. But I cannot think of a single franchise, book, movie, television, comic, anything, where a human would basically try to undermine his own people for his security against a machine horde. And when I look at characters like Fresno Bob and the other gangsters and the other cartels, they just don't make sense in the context. Now, keep in mind that people found their way to Corinth, that they were roaming, that this is where they found security. They were bust there. It's like, you're going to go ahead and be safe here. That's what the indication is. So Fresno Bob and all these other criminals come into Corinth. And when they get in there, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Maybe I should go rob a bank. Now, does that make sense to you guys? Why is Fresno Bob still operating? I mean, think about it for a second here. Now, we have due process and we have justice and all that. And let's assume for the moment the RPM is based on that. Let's say they're Americans for the sake of argument. And Fresno Bob's going to have his due process. Maybe he has a criminal record and they don't have it. But why would he be in there committing crimes? And then there are people who know he's committing crimes, like Ziggy, and the authorities have not done anything to detain him or stop him. And there are other gangsters in there that are operating within the city. If anything, Corinth should be under martial law. This is from the same civilization that steals children and makes them decode bomb programs. So you're telling me that Fresno Bob is still there running gangs and cartels and having all this stuff go on? And further, what about the criminals down in the caves? Why aren't those people like, it's the end of the world, join up or stay in prison? Why is that not like an option that's given to them? It's given to Dylan. Why isn't it given to anybody else? I know we probably only have a finite amount of Power Rangers, but they have soldiers. Why aren't they... I'm going to ahead myself here on a couple of things about the civilians. I just don't find it incredibly likely that we have all these criminals, villains, possibly serial killers and rapists and whatever, going around the city, which should be monitored down to the smallest atom. Nothing should escape your grip in this city. You should know where everybody is and what everybody's doing. That may sound like 1984, but frankly, it's the end of the world, and that's how we should be operating. Because let's be honest, again, back to a Terminator analogy here. John Connor can't keep an eye on everybody and everything that's going on. That's just a fact of life for the way their end of the world is. The end of the world on Power Rangers is condensed to this one city. Excuse me. And you're telling me they can't even stop crime in their own city? If they can't stop crime within their own city and detain these people, then what hope do they have to defeat the machines? Not much. So, yes. Let's talk about the civilians. And I'm sorry I'm getting frustrated here, people. It's just hard to articulate with all this rage that I have in me right now, but let's talk about the civilians. So before I did this review, I went back and watched some clips from a couple of episodes, and I sat down and watched Rain, which was about the fourth episode. And basically, Flynn, Summer, and Scott are taking Dylan on a tour of Corinth. And like Dylan says, you're showing me what I would be fighting for and all that. And then it starts to rain, and then Dylan's looking at this nice little happy couple that's sitting down, having a picnic with their children. The children play, and oh, get the umbrella, so nice. It's a Kodak moment and all that. Why are these people living in denial? I seriously think that's what's happening. You're telling me it's the end of the world, there are maybe 1 million people left or less, and you are having a picnic in the park. These people don't live in reality. You have civilians that have normal everyday jobs that they go to. That was established in the series. How can you have that? How can you have Summer's parents in there who are rich and have money and obviously don't work and have influence, and characters like Fresno Bob who's able to do all this criminal activity? Again, this goes back to a census, and if you have a census of people, everybody should be doing something. It's the end of the world. You should not be... I'm not saying you shouldn't have free time, because I think that's kind of necessary, but every single person in that city should be a soldier, should be a technician, should be somebody who's doing local law enforcement with the civilians, should be somebody who's building things, working in factories, working on making food and all this stuff. Nobody can be spared. Everybody must be doing a job. They must have something to go ahead and do. And when I see people in the show walking down the street in business suits, that tells me that they're not doing anything to help their cause. That somewhere Joe Blow is walking down the street, going to an accounting job, or going to a job as a lawyer, or any number of things. Now, are those things important? Yes. But it's the end of the world! Everybody should be drafted, should be in some sort of army here, should be doing something. So when you see those people out having a merry time and all that, it's like they're living in a fantasy world. That's what I believe Corinth is it's a fantasy world, because it doesn't match with the dire situation that they find themselves in. Let me put it to you this way. I thought, and I held out hope to the last episode, that we would have this episode, the one that I created in my head, which would justify everything that had happened. See, I imagined the Rangers went out, and they found a group of nomadic survivors, somehow surviving the toxic atmosphere, and they bring them into Corinth. And you have the leader there. Probably a young teenager, older man, whatever, whoever you want to cast. And he basically says for the last 3 or 4 years, or however long they've been out there, they've been wandering like nomads in the desert, like the Hebrews exiting Egypt. 40 years of wandering, that kind of biblical stuff. And he talks about how every day it's another day of survival. You could be killed at any second. You can't sleep for an instant. You can't let your guard down. That people died all around him. That he started out with maybe 1,000 people, and now he's down to 20. And he's living with the guilt that he led them to their deaths, that he is not good enough, and that the world is harsh and cruel. And now that they've made it to Corinth, they've found salvation. That they've found weapons, supplies, place to relax and heal their wound at a medical center. And he's like, they got Power Rangers. We can win this. Give me a weapon. Let's go back out there. Let's bring the fight to the machines. And then this person walks around Corinth. He sees a guy chatting on a cell phone saying, oh, I'm going to be late to the office, blah, 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 and stuff. And you see two women gleefully shopping and trying to go buy stuff. And you see two kids flying a kite down the park and stuff. And he just looks at the Rangers and goes, what the hell is this? This is a fantasy. You people are shielded from the real world, from the reality. You don't know how bad it is out there. And then the Rangers would look at their situation, realize, yeah, it is bad out there. And we've been living a fantasy. We've been sheltered from the rest of the world, and we're spoiled. We have all this technology to where we have leisure time, and we have the ability to have shopping and all that kind of stuff. And we can have big, fancy, expensive weddings and all that good stuff. But it's not real. I wanted a character to come into Power Rangers to break them and show the reality of where it is that they're living in a fantasy. Because this fantasy is one of the major issues I have with the show. That they are living something that should not exist. That they are spoiled, that they have everything, and they don't know what suffering is. That's why there's the comedy show. That's why they can act stupid, is because they don't understand the magnitude of what's happening. And this character comes in, and their attitude changes, and they do realize the magnitude of what's going on. But that never happened. And I don't know why it didn't happen. You're infusing comedy and a fantasy world where it should not exist. You are taking things that do not mesh with each other and trying to say that they can coexist at the same time. Now, I know we live in a harsh world, and I know that people in the Middle East who are dying and all that, that's bad for them, yes. And yes, they have their entertainment, they have their leisure, they have fun on occasion. But for people living out there, it's a constant war. It is just like Vengeance, where you could die any moment from America, from ISIS, from Al-Qaeda, from whoever. Life for them is very different than it is in America. So basically what you are saying by using Corinth and the way that the Rangers' attitudes are, it's like you take that vapid mean girl and take her to a shopping area, and she's like, oh my OMG, look at this, I'm going to buy this and stuff. And not realizing the danger that's around her. And she doesn't die. Now, I don't want that to happen to anybody in that situation, but for all intents and purposes, Corinth should be destroyed. These people should be dead. There is no reason why they are still around. I mean, why doesn't Vengeance have an all-out assault on this place? What is so special about Corinth that's protecting them? Is it this fantasy land that's protecting them? We've seen time and time again that Vengeance has swarms and swarms of machines and drones and robots. He can destroy them at any time. But much like Khan, he seems to have two-dimensional thinking, and he fails to this fantasy world full of children. And that is the core of what I hate about RPM, is that it takes something serious and dire, something that should be taking itself seriously, should have this somber attitude, this realization, these moments of clarity, and like, this is really bad. And they don't have those. They have comments. Haha, let's put a cannon in the refrigerator. Oh, let's have the Thing hand run around this place. Let's have a talent show. Let's have an episode of Will She Not Get Married and stuff like that. No. That does not work. They don't fit. They don't belong with each other. You can't have that. It is your cake and eating it too. No, you can't do that. But they insisted on doing that. They take the comedy, mix it with the seriousness, and that's where you get this, I believe somebody pointed out, emotional whiplash. They don't exploit the seriousness of their predicament. They treat it as a joke. They treat it like, get them next time. We'll meet again, Spider-Man. That's how they treat it. When again, this should be somber and serious and darker. Now, am I saying it can't have fun? No, I'm not saying that. But the choices they made that made it fun, quote, fun, they just don't work. They really don't. And if I may make one last comparison, it's like making Christian Bale Batman of The Dark Knight, making his arch nemesis the Cesar Romero Joker. Cesar Romano. Taking the 1960s Batman and making him the main villain of The Dark Knight. That is basically what RPM is. Taking something goofy and serious and injecting it, or taking something goofy and silly and dumb and injecting it into a serious situation where it has no right belonging. Now, you can say I, again, expected too much out of this, but again, when your premise is the end of the world, that stuff does not fly. That does not work, and nor should it. And that is the major issue that I have with RPM. Now, before I end, I do have at least 2 other episodes that I want to go ahead and talk about. I think I've made my point clear on these other things. But there are 2 episodes that I think are worth pointing out. One episode is the Dome Dolls. Now, for those of you who have seen it, basically Venjix sends a monster who puts a gas into the city that sends all the men to sleep. First of all, keep in mind he sends them to sleep. Doesn't kill them, sends them to sleep. He could have easily put, noxious gas up in the air. He could have put anthrax or any number of airborne contagions and stuff. But no, he decides to put something in the air that makes them go to sleep. Knocks them out, whatever, puts them in a coma. That's what they do. And only the females are able to go ahead and do anything. They're still awake. And this is one of your typical episodes where you have the women, who are always viewed as secondary. Sexist opinions will say they're not as good as the men or whatever you want to claim, and they have to go ahead and save the day. And as every story will tell you, they do save the day. That's what happens. And those are typically good stories. Look at Fury from Justice League. That worked pretty well with Wonder Woman and Hawkgirl and all the other female characters. I thought that worked out to their advantage. The problem I have with Dome Dolls is that the women do succeed, or one woman essentially, in reviving the men. But when Summer and Gemma have to fight the villains by themselves without the males, they actually fail in the battle. They cannot keep their own against the machines. They are defeated, and the men have to come in and save them. Ziggy literally says, "Stay away from our women." I hope you realize how ridiculous that line is. I don't even have to go into further detail there. But Ziggy says that. So what is this episode telling us? The episode is telling us that the women are smart enough, but they're not strong enough on their own. Now let's compare this to what this was adapted from, which was Go-Onger Grand Prix number 38, The Maiden's Sanctity. Now in that episode, there's a similar premise. In this, all the male Go-Ongers and the male Zords are frozen. Okay? They can't move. They're incapacitated. So it is up to Saki, Mir, and Bear RV to save the day. And you know what happens? They do save the day. The 3 of them were able to hold their own off a single monster, defeat them, and save the men. That's what they were able to go ahead and do. So when you look in comparison between the Sentai version and the American version, it shows that the Japanese Go-Onger women are more than capable of holding their own without the men. But the RPM girls, yeah, they can come with the cure, but they're not strong enough. They can't defeat the monster by themselves. They need the men to save them. And I'm not a feminist. I don't take women's studies and all that crazy stuff. Okay, that's not what I believe in. All that, or I mean, that's not what I'm going to go ahead and say. I'm not. Let me just make the point here is that I'm not here to condone Power Rangers for anti-woman or anything like that. The point I'm trying to make in this particular case is that they have demeaned their female characters because they're female. That's the point I'm trying to go ahead and make. Which is why I believe that episode is just horrible. But I think we now come to the final nail in the coffin. When it comes to worst episodes, I have like a 1A and 1B. The worst episode, there'll be that 1A, 1B, whatever. I'm going to get into that one another time. But RPM contains one of those two. And that is the episode And Action. Now, what is this episode about, you may ask if you've never seen it? Basically, at the beginning of an episode, Ziggy breaks the fourth wall, turns to the camera, says freeze, and takes us on a tour of how Power Rangers RPM is made from behind the scenes. Where do I begin? Believe it or not, this is an episode. This is not a behind-the-scenes featurette. This is not a making-of documentary. This is not a bonus material on the DVD or a television special that aired before Life with Louie in the summer of '95. I hope you understand that reference. This is an episode that counts towards the 700 episode count ending with that season. And it's a behind-the-scenes of how it is made. Now, those of us who are not in filmmaking have seen these features before, and those of us who are in filmmaking have seen this firsthand and have experienced it. And we have seen in Power Rangers them do behind the scenes before. We've had the bloopers where you see behind, what happens after the camera keeps rolling or when they flub their lines. And before Operation Overdrive aired, they had a special where Mac takes us around and shows us the prop and costume department and how they make the different sets for Power Rangers and all that. And you know why they do that? Because it's not part of the story. It's not part of the continuity. It does not exist within the reality of the show in which you created. But some idiot at Disney decided, in this limited episode run, how about we take a break from telling any story, any semblance of a story, and let's piss away our time with showing everybody how behind the scenes works in Power Rangers and how we film an episode. Doesn't that sound like a great idea, people? Keep in mind, this is a show that has 32 episodes, and it has a story that it's trying to go ahead and tell about into the world. This is also a series that has a clip show only a few episodes after this airs. So not only are you doing a clip show, which is wasting time in and of itself, but you have an episode that means nothing and tells no story. When this episode originally aired, I actually recorded on my DVR, and when Ziggy said freeze, and so we're going to show you how it takes behind the scenes, I thought this would be like a side intervention. It would actually be a bigger story. Maybe it's Ziggy's dream or his way of coping with the reality of the situation that's the end of the world. But no, I fast forward through the parts where they were shown behind the scenes, and fast forward, and fast forward, and fast forward. And by the end of it, the episode was over. If you could even call it that. Excuse me. I understand the shows are on a tight budget, and you have to do clip shows because of that. And bottle shows. That's another thing you could do. But name me one damn show that has ever taken an episode out of its limited run to show you how the episode is made. And no, sitcoms don't count because those are for comedy. Those are supposed to be fun. Drew Carey Live, that's a different thing, okay? If you were over budget or you didn't have money, then why'd you have 32 damn episodes? Why didn't you just cut it down to 31 or 30? And let's take If Vengeance 1 out so we didn't have this damn clip show in there. Why didn't you just cut episodes? Why were you motivated to make this episode? And believe it or not, this episode was written by Judd Lynn. Judd Lynn is one of my favorite writers in all of Power Rangers. But Judd decided, you know what, let's take a break from the seriousness and take a break from the story and piss away this episode and enrage our fans. Let's give them nothing to look at. Because that's basically what you did. If we had any questions about how Power Rangers RPM was made, then give us a special. But don't pretend with us that it is an episode. Do not begin with a full title sequence. Actually begin with a story about having a monster, and then suddenly, we were joking the whole time. This is not a real episode, but watch us anyway. It's not even an episode, people. It's not real. So, I don't get it. Why was this even here? What is a justifiable reason to have an action? If you want to say it's because of budget, there are 100 other ways to do that. You know, maybe cut down on Kalish explosions, take out a CG effect here and there, take out a superfluous character. Or not film the damn episode. So, I think I've taken enough of your all's time here tonight. But I'd like to think that I have fully articulated to everybody here everything that is wrong with RPM. Yes, there are some nitpicks here and there that I have a problem with. The biggest nitpick being the fact that it's not in high definition. Because somebody please explain to me why Go-Onger is in HD, RPM's owned by Disney, and Disney couldn't spare a couple of HD cameras so that the footage would match. And they did this with Operation Overdrive and Jungle Fury. You'd think by the third year they would have been able to fix this problem. But no, let's just squish and squash those images and make them look really distorted. So you want that nitpick? There you go. There's one right there. That makes no damn sense. And I think anybody who made that decision should have been fired. Yeah, we're going to take an HD image and we're going to mash it up this way so it doesn't look in any way consistent. But I'm going to go ahead and make last call here. So for those of you brave enough to have stuck around, again, I'd like to think I've articulated all my points on why I think RPM is the worst season of all time. Yes, there are some good things about it, and I mentioned that. We had a good plot, good characters in Flynn, Jim, and Gemma, and sometimes Dylan, and the idea of alphabet soup. That was also something good. But everything else was wrong with this season, and it comes down to my main point. You're putting comedy in something that is meant to be serious. And again, you can get away with comedy. They always did that in Power Rangers. But again, the stakes in Power Rangers were never genocide. We had never faced an enemy who wanted to eliminate every single one of us for the crime of being human. We had enemies that wanted to conquer us, wanted to rule us, wanted to enslave us, wanted to turn us into dinosaurs. But we had never had a villain that wanted to commit genocide. And how do we treat that threat? How do we approach the villain that wants to commit genocide against us for our mere existence? With a talent show and a cannon in the refrigerator. That is how we combat that enemy. Why? Because we are Power Rangers RPM and we just stop caring. So I think I've said my piece. And again, you guys are free to disagree with me here. And if you want to debate in the comments, be my guest. I would love to hear you guys defend a lot of this. Because I just don't see how it's defendable. I don't see how you can take this to anybody at the time then, anybody now, and anybody in the future and say this was a good idea to take this serious, somber plot and story idea and make it funny. And again, back to SF Debris, who I also have tremendous respect for. You can't make a musical out of Auschwitz. Plain and simple. So, I want to thank you guys again for sticking around here, for listening to me. I hope you've been entertained. And I'm not here to change your opinion. And maybe my opinion will change. Maybe sometime in the future there will be a worse Power Rangers season out there. And in some ways I kind of hope there is. But we'll just have to go ahead and see. But again, that's my opinion. I hope you don't think less of my other videos for it. And I don't think less of you for having the opinion that RPM is the greatest. That's fine. If it makes you happy, all power to you. But I just wanted you guys to know what it is about RPM that just is repulsive to me. Why I think that. And let's just leave it be. We have tons of other bad things to talk about, but just as many good things to go ahead and talk about, and we'll definitely get to those here in the future. But I definitely want to thank you guys for putting up with me tonight, for listening to me. So, hope you all have a good evening, have fun, and the tavern is now closed.